if it doesn't make you too uncomfortable, I want to open this morning being a bit transparent. You okay with that? Well, I'm not getting a lot of amens in that.
Amen.
Amen.
You know, it's difficult to grasp how much time has passed. But this month actually marks a decade since the breakup of my previous marriage. 10 years.
Wow.
And it was a conflicted time, I understand, for many of you. It was a very conflicted time. Here, confronted with discerning what amounted to, at the time, kind of a he said, she said mess. Now, I was encouraged by my leadership at the time to take a month, sabbatical month, and obviously in need of some personal ministry. And certainly with no viable Saturday options, I had returned to my home congregation and pastor. I wanted to go home. And I was back in my familiar place before God's call was placed on my life. I was behind the mixing board as God had found me when he called me. Every Sunday morning, and I was soaking up at that time unconditional love, words of wisdom, words of encouragement. When it came to the attention of one of my former congregants where I was attending, he felt it was his righteous Christian duty to confront the pastor regarding his decision to welcome my return to regular fellowship. The former congregant did his best to convince the pastor my sins and failures had no place in God's house. The pastor's response, and I'm paraphrasing, was short and to the point, conveying this to the former congregant. The pastor said, I have several broken pastors in regular attendance whose sins and failures are no worse than any other. Nobody, especially you, will dictate to me whom I do or don't minister to. Many years ago, there was a magazine that came out on the West Coast. It was called New West Magazine. And its first edition was an article about Christians on television. And the journalist said this at the end of his article, personally, I assume Jesus has more class than most of his agents. And obviously that was intended as criticism. But you know something? He's right. He's right. Yeshua definitely has more class. He has a lot more class than any of his agents. More class than all of us combined. But I guess an old adage that you can't tell the value of something by the package comes to play here. And that is certainly true in terms of rabbis, and pastors, elders, deacons, priests, leaders, and anyone else really who's a witness of the way of Yeshua HaMashiach. Like the treasure of salvation buried in the dirt in the parable that Yeshua told, the treasure was so precious that the man sold everything to buy it. Like the pearl without price hidden in the ugly oyster shell for which a man gave up everything. The container doesn't always reflect the value of its contents. And that's very much a challenge for somebody who part-time sells upholstery and mattresses. There's a pretty exterior, but really there's no indication on the outside of how it is made on the inside. Unless, of course, you trust me. And that contrast is the heart of the passage from this morning's apostolic writings portion that Ariel read for us from Rabbi Shaul's second letter to Corinth. The amazing contrast between the scripture called the shining glory of God in the face of Yeshua HaMashiach and the feeble, imperfect, fragile, ugly containers by which this glorious gospel is carried and delivered to his people. I don't think that Rabbi Shaul when he found this Corinthian congregation had any idea how much they would break his heart. I don't think any rabbi or pastor has any idea how a congregation can break your heart till it happens. They first broke his heart by dragging into their life, as believers all, their sins that they had already been forgiven of. And so he wrote his first letter to them, pointing out iniquity after iniquity after iniquity after iniquity that were characteristic, supposedly, of their pre-Yeshua life, to tell them, you've got to shed those things. You've got to move beyond this stuff. And it wasn't long after he had unburdened his grieving heart over their sin when false teachers then start showing up. False teachers showing up with heretical ideas. Hypocritical liars subtly deceiving the Kehillat with what Rabbi Shaul described as doctrines of demons. And of course, to be taken seriously, they first had to achieve status in the congregation, rising to the place where they would be recognized as teachers or leaders. And in order to do that, they had to systematically erode the people's confidence in their current rabbi, Shaul. Relentlessly, mercilessly, and consistently, for months and months and months, they challenged Shaul in order to undermine his integrity and his credibility and his message. Broke his heart. He was so devastated by this on one occasion, they went for a visit. When he got there in an effort to straighten things out and call them back to his teaching, to himself, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the truth. A man in the congregation apparently stood up and blasted Shaul right in his face. And nobody coming to his defense, Shaul left with an absolutely broken, shattered heart. He then sent Titus there with another letter, a letter not included in the apostolic canon, and through Titus he sent them a message. Don't abandon me, because you abandon me, you abandon the truth. And his words apparently touched a nerve. When Titus returned, he reported that people appeared to take notice of what Shaul had written. The false teachers, however, they remained, which concerned Shaul greatly. So as with most congregations, they're fickle. People are messy. You should all nod at that. People are messy. We're messy. Amen. And we're fickle. Which prompted him then to write a second letter. So 2 Corinthians represents the hardest thing for a man of God, anybody of God, man, woman, child, to ever do, because it was a letter he had the right to, one, defend himself, while acknowledging that he's really nothing. How awkward is that? He has to defend himself as a teacher of the truth. He has to defend himself as a Talmid or disciple of Yeshua HaMashiach. He has to defend himself as a called melech or messenger of God. He's got to defend himself. Because he knew that gifts and calling are what? Irrevocable. Irrevocable. And yet all the while, knowing humbly that he's really nothing in God's eyes. And the false apostles are so relentless in their assault trying to discredit Shaul that they approached it every way that they possibly could come at it to diminish him. If you go back to our 2 Corinthians portion, chapter 4, verse 1, he says, God has shown us such mercy that we do not lose courage, keyword, lose courage as we do the work he has given us. We have a lot of reason to lose courage. But we don't lose courage, do we? No. In Rabbi Shaul's point of view, this ministry is too glorious, and in spite of what they're saying to you, we have renounced the things hidden because of shame. So what do? You attack Shaul's character, right? Is that what you do in court? Is that what you do? You discredit the witness? Yep. Isn't that what anybody does in the world as witnesses of Yeshua? They discredit you. So that's what they did to Shaul. It's exactly what they did. Discredit his witness. Discredit his character. The false teachers apparently were saying, well, if you really knew Shaul, if you really knew him like I know him, you would know he's a hypocrite. He's a phony. He's a fake. He's a deceiver. And on the surface, on the outside, yeah, he looks pretty religious. He looks holy. He looks sanctified and pious. The fact of the matter is, he's got a secret life. A secret life of shame. He's a hypocrite. Underneath, he's a wicked, evil man. We're talking about the writer, 2/3 of the apostolic writings. Of course, then they had to attack his theology. Because they weren't going to stop just at his character. Let's go with his theology. Right? They were saying he's a manipulator. He's a con man. He's a David Koresh. He's a Jim Jones. He's a charlatan. He is a kapleos, the word used in 2 Corinthians 2:17 for a huckster. Rabbi Shaul's response, we're not employing deception. We refuse to do so. Of course, then, they went on to say, well, he adulterated the Word of God. He says, in response, we're not distorting God's message. On the contrary, by making very clear what the truth is. We commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. They even attacked them personally. It got really low. Later in the letter, if you go to chapter 10, verse 10, his letters say they are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech contemptible. So they're saying he's ugly and he can't talk. They're getting personal. Yeah, he's funny looking. Boy can't talk, can't communicate. See, if you're handsome and you can't communicate, people can at least enjoy looking at you. And if you're ugly, but you can't communicate, it's tough. People at least enjoy listening to you, right? But if you're ugly and you can't communicate, it's getting pretty tough to get the message out. 2 Corinthians 11:6, I may not be a skilled speaker, he says, but I do have knowledge. Anyhow, we have made this clear to you in every way, in every circumstance. That was pretty low. That was pretty darn hurtful, attacking his personal blemishes and his physical defects. Some commentators, if you look at commentaries, they'll suggest that he was a small hunchback. Many of you probably heard that. He had some kind of physical deformity. One thing we know for sure, he was getting up in years. He was aged and he was scarred. But whatever his shortcomings and looks were, he was obviously very aware of his own shortcomings. Whatever his lack might be in personal charm and attractiveness, whatever his limitations might be in oratorical skills, whatever he might not have had in terms of charm, believe me, he knew it. You know what his response was when they started hammering him? His character, his theology, personally. He says, what do you want out of a clay pot? What do you want? You're right. All right. So, you're right. I have shortcomings. You're right. I have weaknesses. I have temptations. I'm flawed. I'm a mess, just like you. See, he was being criticized by people much more sinful and weak than he, and yet he found it very hard, very painful to defend himself because he knew that in many ways they were right. He was nothing. He was nothing. But at the same time that he knew he was nothing, he knew the truth. Amen. He knew the truth about Yeshua And he was compelled to share that truth, regardless of how they felt about him, about how pretty he was or how well he spoke. He knew the truth of the gospel, and he was going to proclaim it no matter what.
Amen. Hallelujah.
Amen.
And then he says, but we have this treasure in clay jars. So frail and perfect, common that he was, he didn't make any argument. And he knew it. He says, writing to his apprentice Timothy, I'm sure he's maybe unloading a little bit, but also trying to warn Timothy, prepare Timothy for ministry, the joy of it. He says in 1 Timothy chapter 1, 12 to 13, I thank the one who has given me strength, the Messiah Yeshua, our Lord, that he considered me trustworthy enough to put me in his service. And even though I used to be a man who blasphemed and persecuted and was arrogant, but I received mercy because I had acted in unbelief, not understanding what I was doing. Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing. He wasn't shocked. I mean, you have to understand, this was like the end of his life here. He was in his 60s.
A young buck.
I used to be a man who blasphemed, he says. I was a persecutor. I was arrogant. And yeah, I was shown mercy. Brothers and sisters, ministers, just people. We're just people like you. We're people. We're not gods. I haven't perfected walking on water yet. I'm working on it.
I'm trying.
When I was younger, I did. Of course, it was frozen, but I was pretty good at that. But snow, I can walk on that. People are not perfect. You know, I don't need to tell you that. So, brothers and sisters, if people aren't perfect, don't expect perfection in ministry. Don't expect perfection in ministry.
Amen.
If God could not use poor instruments and feeble voices, there wouldn't be any music.
That's right.
Goodness, he lets me play. I was in the company last night of people who you've watched on TV who make music 10 times better than I am. Abraham, think of Abraham. Guilty of duplicity, and yet he became the man of faith and the friend of God? How about Moshe? Stuttering speech and a quick temper, yet he was a man chosen to lead a nation and commune with God and receive his Torah. And we could spend all day on David. Are you kidding me? David, adultery, conspiracy, murder, unfaithfulness, as a husband and as a father, repented. And became a man after God's own heart, and certainly the number one songwriter of history. Eliyahu, he ran from Jezebel, begging to die. That I can relate to. But Eliyahu, who had stood in the Mount Carmel, defied Ahab and all the prophets of Baal and heard the small, still voice of God at Horeb. And of course, we can't forget Isaiah, Yeshayahu, in the presence of the heavenly vision says, woe to me, I too am doomed, because I am a man with unclean lips, living among a people with unclean lips. But when he had been cleansed, what did he say? Hineni, here I am. Here I am, send me. And then there's Kepha, or Peter, another clay pot, the leader, the spokesman of the Talmudim, who denied the Lord with oaths and curses and even had the audacity to correct him. And he was restored by the compassion of Yeshua in the midst of his disobedience and was enabled by the power of the Ruach HaKodesh to speak with such force on the day of Shavuot the truth of the Messiah. How can we forget Yochanan, the Talmud, who expected to be praised by Yeshua for refusing to allow a man not of their company to cast out demons in the name of Yeshua, and who with Yaakov and James wanted to call down fire from heaven that burned up a Samaritan village, and who with Yaakov again wanted the chief places in the kingdom and sent their mother to ask for them. Hey, mom, go ask. This same Yochanan became the beloved Talmud, the Talmud some will call the Talmud of love. And of course, where does that take us? To Shaul. Rabbi Shaul. He's under assault unjustly. He's falsely accused. He's battered. He's beaten up. And might I say, physically beaten up. He had it taken to him every way that you could. Because you read later in this letter, second letter from Corinth, or to Corinth, if you read in chapter 11, he lists all his beatings. 5 times beaten by his own people, 39 stripes, 3 times beaten with rods by those who were not his people, the Gentiles, shipwrecked, and on and on and on. It wasn't an easy life. He suffered so much that he literally says in the same passage, I die daily. And some will say, well, that's very profound. Well, that's not necessarily figurative. Because people were trying to kill him. He wasn't talking about some mystical, spiritual experience. What he meant was, I get up every morning thinking this could be the day I die. And I know there's some of you that feel that. This could be the day I die. Because I'm getting hit here and I'm getting hit there. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, financially. This could be the day I die. He lived expecting it. Prepared for it. This could be the day I die. He suffered so much. And then he suffered at the hands of the people that loved him the most. In one place he thought he might find some comfort. He even says to the Corinthians, how is it that the more I love you, the less you love me? How is that? I don't get it. Help me. Help me understand. And yet assaulted as he's confessed this is what he deserved. He says, in fact, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. His defense was so interesting in 2 Corinthians because his defense all the way through is, you're right. You're right. You're right, I'm weak. And I know it. I know it. So what he does, he doesn't argue against their accusations of weakness. He affirms them. Lets all the wind out of their sails. He defends himself not on the basis of his natural ability, his pedigree, his knowledge, his theology, his achievements. Not on the basis of human skill. He just agrees and makes a comparison that is incredible. So again, I read verse 7. We have this treasure in clay jars, so that it will be evident that such overwhelming power comes from God, not from me. It's not coming from me, baby. And that's why God puts the priceless treasure in clay pots, so nobody ever has to ask where the power comes from. Amen. These seats are mostly filled not because of me. It has nothing to do with me.
Hallelujah.
Nothing to do with me. In comparison to the glory of the eternal God revealed in the person of Yeshua HaMashiach, in comparison to the wisdom of God's Torah, in comparison to the power of the Ruach HaKodesh, the rabbi is nothing. He has to be nothing. He has to be nothing. Chapter 10, the same letter, he says, we don't dare class or compare ourselves with some of the people who advertise themselves. Isn't that amazing? Even in that day, when we live in this era of mass media, social media, and even there he's talking about, we don't dare class or compare ourselves with some of the people who advertise themselves in measuring themselves against each other and comparing themselves with each other. They are simply stupid. Now that's getting to the point, isn't it? Rabbi Shaul can say it, why can't I? It's stupid. I just start here. We have this treasure, this ministry. And what is the treasure? The treasure is the ministry. And what is the ministry?
Service.
The ministry is the good news.
Amen.
That's the ministry. It's not Judaism, it's not Christianity, it's certainly not Islam. It's the good news.
Amen. Praise the Lord.
We can't go anywhere else. The only thing that should fill that pot is the good news.
Amen.
The good news of the truth and the way of Messiah Yeshua. That's the treasure. The treasure is the truth. This is the treasure. And he put it in ostrakinos. What? He put it in ostrakinos. He put it in clay pots. Clay pots. Guys getting ready to work in your gardens, your yards. I was looking out the window the other day, yesterday, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to start cutting all this grass again. Lord have mercy. Better get the John Deere ready. And my wife, of course, is already talking about cleaning out all the flower beds. Bless her heart, since we have a beautiful house because of all that she does. He puts it in clay pots, it's treasure. And what's a pot? Really, what's a pot? It's baked dirt.
Right.
Think about it. A pot is baked dirt. It's clay. Right? You go digging out your gardens, what do you hate to run into? Oh, stupid clay. You get some topsoil in here. Keep running in that clay. Right? That's what it is. Clay pots are baked dirt. It's cheap. Clay pots are common, breakable, and very easily replaceable. Do you have clay pots? Right? Right. Where are they at? Somewhere stuffed in the corner of your garage, ready for spring. So you go to the gardening place and you get a clay pot. You drop it and go, oh no, I dropped the pot. Big deal. Right? Sweep it up and get another one. Are you out a lot of money? Is it a big tragedy that you dropped a clay pot? No. Clay pot is a clay pot. Does it have any value? It's cheap, common, breakable, disposable, replaceable, valueless, but useful. Very, very useful. It's amazing. Isn't it funny? Isn't it amazing with spring coming upon us, the beautiful things that you will put into the pots? Like a flower. Right? Like a flower. In ancient times, clay pots were more than just decorating our houses with. They had numerous uses. Sometimes they were used to put valuable things in, and you bury them in the ground. You didn't leave them there very long, though. You ever seen a clay pot after been in the ground too long? It starts to deteriorate on the bottom. So you can't leave anything very valuable in the clay pot, buried for any extended period. But that's what they used to do with their valuable things in those days. There weren't safes. There weren't locks. So what do you do with your valuable stuff? What they would do is they put it in a clay pot and they would bury it somewhere and hopefully remember where they buried it. It's like, where are my keys at? I left them here. They're right here. I forgot where I put my stuff so I wouldn't forget where I put it. Right? But that's what they used to do with their valuable things. And that's to save them from being robbed, since they didn't, like I said, have locks or windows or bars. And that's what's illustrated by Yeshua in the parable that I mentioned at the beginning of the message earlier, Matthew chapter 13, about the treasure that's hidden in the field. Clay pots were also used for another application. They were used in the home, essentially, for garbage and waste. Right? To carry out the unmentionable. Right? They go to the bathroom with clay pots. That's what they're used for. Right? 2 Timothy 2:20, in a large house there are dishes and pots, not only of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay. That is, some are meant for an honorable use, and some for a dishonorable use. See, the gold and silver ones had an honorable use, whereas the wood and clay had a less than honorable use. And it says in verse 21, if you're ever going to use any of these things for honor, you've got to do what? What do you got to do with it? You've got to cleanse it, because it's defiled. Clay pots required cleansing for an honorable use. The only value, brothers and sisters, the clay pot had was from the service that it performs. The only value that we have as human beings in this world is the service that we provide for our brothers and sisters in our Lord. That's the only value that we have. That's the only value your life has. Rabbi Shaul is saying, we have this treasure in a garbage can. We have this treasure in a toilet. That's what he's saying. Common containers for the most humble, dirty uses never fit in themselves to be brought into public. And that's how it is in ministry. That's how it is. Our only value as rabbis or pastors or priesthood of believers is as a container. As a container. It's the treasure that we bring that has value. None of this has value. It's what I bring to you or you bring to me that has value. It's the service that we do for each other that has value, that has worth. We go up to the first letter that Paul wrote to Corinth. God chose what the world looks down on as common or regards as nothing in order to bring to nothing what the world considers important. So that no one should boast before God. God has chosen the humble. God has chosen the common. And this is the essence of being a witness or in service to the Almighty God, folks. Whether we do it as a rabbi, or as a pastor, or the priesthood of believers. That's the reality of it. They accuse Shaul. You're weak. You're unimpressive. You're not a good communicator. You're plain, you're common, you're ugly, you're not clever, you're not philosophical, not like the other people we listen to. Because they had a whole bunch of people in Greece at that time. They're all impressive philosophers that they listened to. Well, you're not like so-and-so, you're not like so-and-so. Certainly not culturally sensitive or politically correct. He said, I know, okay? I know. I'm just a pot. So I'll tell you something, though. I have treasure in this pot. What did God use? You know, he used peasants. God used tax collectors. He used fishermen, smelly guys. Right? Smelly guys. Common, smelly guys. To proclaim and write the priceless truth of Yeshua. And brothers and sisters, God hasn't stopped. Not until Yeshua returns. He is still bypassing the elite to get her done. He's still bypassing the hard-hearted, non-listening, proud intellectuals with their social agendas and humanistic ideologies. And we all have them in our lives, our families, our neighbors, our friends, our people we work with. And they're all so much smarter than we are. You poor, ignorant people following that ancient book full of stories. You're not as wise and discerning as the Inuits of this world. Right? God is finding the humble who will courageously carry the treasure of saving truth. For what we are proclaiming is not ourselves. We're not the message. We're not the message. When Rabbi Shaul says in 2 Corinthians, further down in the letter, chapter 12, verse 10, when he says, when I'm weak, I'm strong. He doesn't mean a person with no convictions. He doesn't mean an undisciplined person. He doesn't mean a lazy person. He doesn't mean an irresponsible person. He doesn't mean a person who can't work or work hard. What he means by weakness is it's not about me. It's not. It's not about me. If you want to be used mightily by God, brothers and sisters, it's not about you. It has nothing to do with you. You have got to see yourselves, as I've got to see myself, as nothing more than the trash can in your kitchen. That's what you have to see yourselves as. Truly. It's not you. It's not your wisdom. It's not your knowledge. It's not your anointing. It's not your personality. It's the word and the way of God. We are so, we're just talking about this. Just daily, we're just absolutely just amazed how easily we are led or manipulated or deceived by nice people.
That's right.
People with good personalities.
That's right.
Humble, gentle, nice, sweet people that are full of the venom of Hasatan. Right? Oh, nice little puppy. Right? You ever went up to the cute little doggy, pet the doggy, and then it bit you? That's exactly what I'm talking about. God doesn't choose, doesn't need them. He certainly doesn't choose them. He doesn't choose intellectuals. He doesn't choose great people, the fancy people, the famous people. We have this treasure in clay jars so that it will be evident that such overwhelming power comes from God and not from us. So if you're looking for a human explanation to Shaul's success, there isn't any. There isn't any. We're clay pots. We have nothing to offer, no beauty, no power. And Rabbi Shaul knew it when he said in 1 Corinthians, I was with you in weakness, fear, and much trembling. One theologian wrote this. He said, there always have been men in the world so clever that God could make no use of them. They could never do his work. They were so lost in admiration of their own. And then he says, God's work never depended on them. And it doesn't depend upon them now. The power of God is not the product of human genius or cleverness or technique or ingenuity. The power of the gospel or the good news is the good news. It's the power. Hear me as I wrap this up this morning, brothers and sisters. Cracked pot believers. Crackpots. Do you ever wonder where that came from? That's kind of where it came from. Cracked pot believers are weak, common, plain, fragile, breakable, and dishonorable, and disposable. Clay pots. Sounds great, doesn't it? You're all that as a crackpot believer who declare and follow He who is our chatat, our sin offering, who is also broken for our iniquity.
Yes, amen.
I want to conclude with these thoughts from Jonathan Cahn. Jonathan says, in Isaiah 11, or Yeshayahu 11, it's prophesied that a shoot will spring forth from the root of Jesse. But the Hebrew is more explicit. It literally says a shoot will spring forth from the stump of Jesse. The word is specifically about a tree which has been cut down. And that's a perfect description of Messiah. He came forth out of the fallen, cut off, the cast down kingdom of David. When it looked most hopeless, and when he was born out of it. That's when he was born out of it, I should say. That's the way of Messiah and his blessings. He was born from the broken, the cut down, the fallen, the unlikely, and the hopeless. And that's the way he's born into our lives. It's when we are at our lowest points, when we have nothing to offer of our own and everything seems impossible. That's the root of Jesse, or rather, that's the stump of Jesse. So don't despair over the stumps in your life or those things which have fallen, been cut down, or become hopeless. For out of such stumps are born the blessings, the presence, and the miracle of Messiah. Brothers and sisters, that's a cracked pot believer.
Amen.
Please rise. Let's close in prayer. Bow your heads. Avinu haba shamayim. When we say our Father in heaven, you are high and above us. We are lowly. We are lowly. We have no value in ourselves but that which you put in us, that which we receive. Father, if we are to have any merit or worth or usability in this life, it will be, Father, in the way that we are used. The Father, that we recognize that in ourselves we have no value, but that which, Father, that we will contain and share. That which we will carry to another place, that which we will pour out. Father, I pray in Yeshua's name that you would first cleanse this vessel so that we can be used for an honorable purpose. I pray in Yeshua's name, Father, that then that we would be filled. We would be filled with your Ruach HaKodesh. For Father, being filled, Father, we then have something which we can bring to somebody else. Father, it's a fallen world that needs your grace and mercy poured out in it. If we begin, Father, to honor ourselves more than you, then this vessel will have no use. I pray, Father, in Yeshua's name, anoint us, inspire us, equip us. And Father, break us if necessary to carry out your purposes in this world in the days of your name. B'Shem Yeshua Adonai, and the congregation says, Amen. Yivrech Yahweh v'yishmerecha Tzadonai panav alecha v'yichanecha Tzadonai panav alecha v'sim lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. And I pray the Lord would lift his countenance upon you. And may he grant you peace. B'Shem Yeshua Adonai.